Welcome to the Handyman Pros Radio Show, home improvement and maintenance tips from the pros. This episode's titled, Flush Gordon. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros Radio Show, where our goal is to help save time, money, and aggravation. This edition's entitled, Flush Gordon. To help me explain, I'm here with my cheerful co-host and old buddy, John. John, this week's a bit of a departure from our normal thing, isn't it?
It is. And it's an email question that we got, and we expanded on it a little bit more than we usually do, so we're going to make this a
whole show.
Right.
Because it came out to be. So the show is about rebuilding toilets, a.k.a. Flush Gordon. So enjoy.
From the email bag at handymanprosradioshow.com, we got an email from Randy K., and he's asking about toilets. It seems he has a constantly running toilet. So I want to pose this to you, Larry, because I know that you've just rebuilt a whole bunch of toilets, and I'm sure that you can help.
I have rebuilt a bunch of toilets. It seems like every other call, it's between faucets and toilets lately. And I think part of that reason is a lot of them have been where I live, and we started metering water, so people are getting really concerned about how much water they run. And I have to admit, if your toilet is running all the time, as so many people's toilets are, it really burns through a lot of water.
It does, and I had one do that, and I didn't know why my water bill was going up. I honestly did, and I found it, and it was the toilet.
Yeah, it's a very common thing. So I guess let's just start with, some people ask me, they say, should I just replace the whole toilet? And I guess my thing is, if you understand how a toilet works, it's basically a tank on the top, and it's got a trap in the bottom, and the water runs out of the tank into the thing and pushes the water and the material that's in the toilet out and down the flush. So basically, the ceramic parts that you see really are just that. They're just vessels. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that, John?
Yeah. It's quite an ingenious device, though, actually.
It's invented by whom? Sir Thomas Crapper.
Yes, sir.
True story. That's why it's called something else. Anyway, with that said, you can replace the toilet if you want to, mostly for aesthetic reasons.
Right.
But almost all modern toilets are completely rebuildable, and so that's what I have done much of in the past few weeks. Actually, I've rebuilt. I don't even know. I'm starting to carry the parts on the truck. Like all the parts to just redo toilets because I'm having that much call for it. Really a relatively simple job. It does require a little bit of, I'm going to call it technical knowledge. When I rebuild a toilet, I started to just replace part of the guts. Lately, I've stopped doing that, and I rebuild the whole toilet. So there's the tank part and then the parts in the tank. All of that stuff is in the tank. When I say rebuild, there is a gasket that holds the top to the bottom and two or three bolts, I should say, and I replace those as well. I've just found that sometimes the leak comes from, there's several places where it can leak. There's the main valve that comes into the toilet from the supply line that comes out of your wall. That's usually the number one place where there's a leak, and it's usually because it's just old and it gets used a lot. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that, John?
Yeah. But let's define the leaks, though, right? So one leak might be external,
meaning water on
the floor,
yes.
versus water that's going into the bowl and you don't even know it, or you do, and you don't know what to do about it.
Right. So the water on the floor, provided that it's actually water from the toilet and not someone that's missed, all you men out there, It is not a precision aiming device, as I like to say. But if you actually have water on the floor, that generally is a sign of what, John? It usually means your wax ring is bad.
Well, or that seal between the top tank and the toilet.
True. Well, and then also the connection on the supply line.
And the supply line connection. So
yeah.
There's a few, and that's what I was getting at, is that there's a few places like that to look for.
Really, there's only three.
There's only three places to look. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that is the supply line, which is the water that comes from the wall up into the toilet.
Right.
There's usually two connections there, or I guess three if you count the valve itself. But there's a valve, there's a compression fitting on one side and compression fitting on the other side, and they will leak.
Yep.
Over
or the
time.
Valve itself leaks, right?
And then the valve itself leaks.
And those things are notorious because if they don't get turned on and off very often, like once every 10 years, it seems like.
Yeah.
If you haven't had your toilet rebuilt, and those things, the seals in that'll get hard and it'll leak right through that valve.
Through the valve in the actual that comes out of the wall.
Right.
So you have that. The second place where you can get a leak is actually that connection between the top tank and the bottom part of the toilet. If you have a 2-part tank, which most toilets are 2 parts, there's a big rubber. It looks almost like a donut that's in there, and there's 2 bolts, and both the bolts and the donut go through the tank and through into the bottom part, and you can get leaks on either of those places. So you can get a leak at the donut, or you can get a leak on the bolts. The bolts will give you a different kind of leak than the donut. The donut will only leak when you flush the toilet, and then it will leak a lot, usually. The bolts will give you drips. And so if you're finding drips on the floor, this is generally not a good situation. And then the third place where it can leak is actually in the connection between where the toilet actually bolts to the floor. There is a seal in there. It is called they call them wax rings. They used to be wax. You still can get wax rings. I don't use wax rings. I use poly rings now, which is new. It's a little better in my opinion. Certainly a lot easier to work with, and they don't melt in the truck. If you have that kind of leak, that water will come from underneath the bowl, and it actually will seep out. And those are the dangerous ones because they will rot your floor because you're not paying attention to them.
Right.
So that's where they can leak. Now, constant running is caused by what, John?
Well, that can be a bad flapper valve inside. So there's pieces and parts inside this in the upper tank that control how the water is maintained up there. Right. And the level of that water. Yep. And so the water doesn't get out until you flush
the toilet.
Hit the handle.
Yep. And so there's 2 basic parts there, right? There's the inlet supply valve.
Right.
And there is the flapper valve. And the inlet supply valve is where the water comes in from the wall, goes up in, and it goes up into the top, and it sprays out into the tank. And there's usually a float in there. Would you agree with that?
Right.
And as that water level comes up, the float comes on, and it turns the valve off. Now, in other shows, we've talked about the pressure relief valve, and if you have too much pressure, that valve can actually break or become damaged, and it will continue to run.
Right.
Or just through age and too many cycles and things like that, it will just continue to run. It can be very slow, but the way it's evidenced, the way you'll see it is that you'll actually see water moving in the bowl itself.
Yeah.
So when you flip it up, well, actually, and that's the same for the flapper valve as well. If you see water moving in the bowl or just coming down the sides a little bit, it means one of those 2 valves is bad. The flapper is what, John? Describe a flapper valve.
Well, it's just a big piece of rubber, if you will. I'll just describe it that way. That covers an opening that allows the water to go down into the bowl and fill in the fill valve. There's a couple of different ways the water does enter the bowl.
Right. Depends on brand.
One around the rim, and then there's a direct way that goes through a refill tube. Right.
And there's a couple of different brands. They don't always have an actual what they call a flapper valve. Some of them have a cylindrical system, but it still has a gasket in it, and that gasket can leak. Yeah. And so if you're seeing water move in there, it's in the top part of the tank. Generally, 9 out of 10 times. Right. Probably 9.9 out of 10 times. Right. So all those parts can be rebuilt, as it were. Now, as I said before, I've started rebuilding the whole thing. And I've done that because I've just found that some of those, when I haven't, sometimes the flapper valve itself won't be sealing properly. It actually is in the mechanism that goes down into the bottom of the tank. And so I just said, it's not worth my effort not to not do it. Plus, the bolts usually need to be replaced. The bolts older bolts for whatever reason, John, seem to be made of they seem to be made of carbon steel, and they rust. I
never understood that.
Yeah.
I never understood that because I don't even know if, maybe somebody out there can correct me on this, but I don't even know if you can buy
steel bolts
like that for a toilet. Now you can buy steel bolts, but not for that application. Every time you see them in a big box store or hardware store, they're always going to be a
bronze, brass, or stainless steel,
or a stainless steel bolt.
It's just what.
But the other ones, I've run across it, and it's a total nightmare.
Yeah, it's a mess. They're difficult. They usually break.
They rust.
And they rust.
It's awful.
They leave red streaks in the inside of the
So that's another thing, folks. If you're experiencing a lot of rust coming into your tank, you probably have that problem too.
Yeah, and you need to rebuild. So one bit of caution here too is the seals that these things seal with are really highly susceptible to chlorine.
They are.
And so you want to be careful putting like the chlorine tabs in and things because it'll degrade those seals pretty quickly, actually. I'm kind of surprised.
Yeah.
And so while it keeps your toilet clean, and I understand that part of it, and I get that part of it, they do tend to degrade those seals quickly, and it actually makes the problem worse, I guess. Would you say?
Yeah, they do.
Hasten the problem.
They do. They do. Now, there are some pieces and parts out there that say that they're chlorine resistant, but folks, it's probably not a good idea to drop those big tabs in the top of your tank. The better solution to that is there's little kits, right, for probably $11 that you can put inside your tank that goes from the inlet to the refill tube, but it makes a bypass. It goes through a little cartridge, but right down the refill tube into the bowl itself, and it picks up chlorine that way. So you fill this thing with these tablets, these special tablets, and it goes down in there. I think you can get them for like $11.
Well, and there you go. Because we're always solutions oriented here.
Exactly. So that bypasses the problem of having chlorine sitting in the tank with all the pieces and parts.
Yep. And chlorine too will hasten the degradation of bolts as well. Pretty convinced
Absolutely.
of that. So rebuilding them it's a relatively simple process. Probably the biggest thing you have to do is you have to make sure you have a couple of buckets because you're going to need to get the water out of the toilets, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And the other thing too, I think we'd started to mention it, but I do want to say if your toilet is constantly running and it sounds like your sink is running with a high amount of pressure on it, you want to have your water pressure tested and test your PRV valve. We have another show on that. And actually, we've got a blog post on our website as well talking about the PRV valve. That's the pressure regulating valve. The insides of those toilets are not. They're made of, mostly today. They're made of plastic, so they're not really made for high pressures. And high pressure constitutes anything above about 60 psi.
Right.
And most water systems are anywhere from 80 to 100 plus psi. And if your pressure regulating valve is bad, it will more or less blow that valve apart.
So let me ask you this, Larry. How much can what's Randy looking at if he does this himself? How much?
So total parts, and now when I do it, I also replace the supply line just because. Unless somebody has a braided stainless steel supply line, I replace the stainless steel supply line. Supply line's going to be $6 to $10 depending on the length. You can buy the whole rebuild kits. There's several different brands. I would say not one is not any better than the other ones, but they're going to run it in the $20 to $25 range. And that's it. So
about $30.
About $30, you can totally rebuild it. You're going to spend, if you haven't done it, you're going to spend probably an hour doing it. I've done it so much I can do it in about 30 minutes, maybe less than that at this point.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's just become
it's
like a process, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just boom, it's just done. But you want to do that. So it's not a huge amount of money, but gosh, the water savings alone, it'll save you. If your water bill's gone up, you'll save that because that constant run, if you think about it, it's running probably a gallon a minute.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know. Mine was really going. I didn't even know it.
Yep.
So it wasn't even that noticeable.
Right.
And that was the thing that really shocked me because that was the first time I've had running toilets before, but this one was I didn't even notice it.
That's right.
So, and I will say is, for $30, Randy, if you're listening, is that compared to if he calls a plumber, what do you think it's going to cost?
$250.
Yeah.
Handyman significantly less than that.
Right. How much is a toilet?
About $100.
So
time to get it all said and done.
So how much is that? How much is a brand new toilet?
Brand new. So it's funny you say that. I just happened to notice that Lowe's has a brand new toilet on sale right now for $99. Now I don't know. I'm sure that's not a great one, but to do a new toilet, you still have to buy the supply line, and you are going to need to buy a wax ring. So there's about $15 to $20 additional. So it's $120 for a new toilet. Is it going to be better? I don't know. I doubt it. So,
So I guess I just wanted to give the options there and what the cost is. So, if you do it yourself,
on the rebuild side.
You're probably looking at $30-$40 maybe at the outset.
And you get to have a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So one word of caution if you want to try doing this yourself. Make sure you have a rag that you don't mind throwing away when you do this, and it's not for the reasons that you think. It actually has to do back with that chlorine issue. Whenever I take that back tank off, and if the ring under the toilet is a black ring, they come black and red, but if it's a black ring, invariably the chlorine has eaten that ring away. Have you had this experience?
Oh, absolutely.
You touch that thing, it's like touching India ink.
Yeah.
It just makes your hand black.
Yeah.
I mean,
it'll stain your skin.
It's like it's stain your skin.
Yeah.
So you want to have a rag that you can wipe your hands off quickly with.
Right.
And I don't know why that happens, but it happens on that. It happens on any time that there's a black gasket. It gets that way, and it's just really nasty.
One other thing that occurred to me, and probably let's talk about this just for a quick second because I'm sure it's going to be on everybody's mind. Okay, so now that I've rebuilt this toilet, or that I'm in the process of rebuilding it, one of the things that's on most people's mind, and it should be, is that how do I know it's not going to leak when I get done? And how am I going to be, satisfied or at ease that that's not going to leak? In other words, how do you seal the pipe that's going up the supply line? So you put a new supply line on. What do you do with that?
Well, I guess it gets down to a physics question, right? So it usually has one end is usually a 3/8 inch wrench. And these are called compression fittings, and they have a rubber gasket inside them, and as you squeeze it down, it actually compresses and will tighten it, self-tightening, I guess, basically we would call it. And on the other end, it's a very similar situation, but it usually has a hand. You can tighten it by hand. Same thing, it has a rubber gasket in there, and as you turn it, it tightens up and it leaks. These lines, that's the supply line side. The supply line is under pressure, right? So, John, if it's going to leak, when's it going to leak?
When you're on vacation.
Well,
well, and that's I mean, I joke about that, but that's what I'm alluding to. Like when you put some Teflon tape on some of those threads, on the supply line at the very bottom or where the threads are exposed.
So generally, compression fittings don't require Teflon tape. Okay, so you don't want to put Teflon tape on it necessarily. If you need to put Teflon tape on it, something's wrong. Okay,
just make sure that when we walk through that it's when you're done. So after you get done with all that, do you leave like I like to leave like Kleenex or something underneath it.
Oh, the old toilet paper test.
Just to make sure, and I'll come back, because even though I know that I've done it right, I just want to double check just for a sanity check, because I joke about when's it going to leak.
Yeah, when you're on vacation, it's not so good.
And that's kind of the seriousness of the whole situation, because it is under pressure.
Right.
And I leave Kleenex or toilet paper or something underneath it, all around it. I'll dry it off real good after I get all done. And just come back in a little bit and see if there's any water on it.
Because a single drip shows up in that toilet paper.
That's right.
Yep. So that I call that the old toilet paper trick, or what you can use tissue, any kind of light paper, right? Toilet paper.
Yeah.
Use toilet paper because it's right there usually, right? It's hanging right there on the wall.
Right.
So you take that, and you put it out. I use a good strong light too. If I take my flashlight, and lines under pressure are going to leak very rapidly after you turn the water on.
Right.
9 out of 10 times. Now, you will get that errant drip, that one little drip that comes every so often. Usually that's just a slight turn. It does happen. I do put the toilet paper down. I never leave without checking, double checking.
That's what I'm saying.
Probably triple checking.
That's my point.
Yeah. Flush that toilet multiple times, right? When you replace that gasket on the tank, you definitely want to make sure you flush it several times, because that gasket goes up underneath, and you'll see the instructions are very self-evident as to how to do this. It's all well contained in all the kits that you buy. It'll tell you exactly what you need to do. But when you flush that one and it leaks, have you ever flushed one and had that leak, John? Yeah,
absolutely.
Water comes pouring out.
Yeah,
I mean, just pouring out. You're like,
right. Then that's a bad afternoon.
Yeah.
So I guess the other thing is, in my experience, is that shutoff valve, and I'm just going to go back to that for a second, has always been a little
problematic.
That's a good way to put it, because when they don't get used very often, they don't get used very often. And I'm not going to get into specifics of what, they got like a packing in there in the front, and that thing tends to break down after a while. So just kind of watch that when you turn it off and you turn it back on. Just make sure that, so sometimes
they leak.
When I put mine if I'm screwing it down and halfway, it starts leaking. If it's all the way out, it doesn't leak.
Yep.
So just be, and I'm just saying all this is just, these are the kind of things to look out for so that you have a nice,
clean install,
watertight, drip situation at the end.
And they'll even leak sometimes when you turn them all the way in, depending, even on the quarter turn ones. A quarter, you'll turn it. You'll take that supply line off, and it won't leak fast. It generally does not leak fast, but all of a sudden you'll see water coming over the edge, and you're like, what the heck?
Right.
And that just means put a rag down underneath it. I generally, whenever I do any one of these jobs, I lay a rag down underneath it. I put a small bucket up underneath it, because when you unhook the supply line, water comes streaming out, and when you take the guts out of the toilet, water comes streaming out, and then when you take it apart, water comes streaming out. It's not a lot of water. Turn the water off, flush the toilet first. That's the first thing to do. That drains out most of the water. Lift the flapper up and hold it up with your hand on the little chain. Just grab the chain, lift it up. That'll get rid of most of the water. But you'll see there's still a little water in the bottom, and you need to dry that off. So I always put a rag down just because it's just easier. The rag cleans it up. Plus, you need that rag to clean your hands from that black cook, as I said before. And so that's kind of the process that I do with it. I mean, I've gotten good at it. I'll tell you. Boom, whang, hoorah. Tighten your toilet bolt seats while you're at it.
Right.
Because invariably those bad boys always come loose too. I don't understand why. I never have figured it out, but they always come loose. So,
well, that's a great roundup of the toilet, and Randy, good luck with it. It's not a very hard job, and it'll save you a whole lot of money. Anything else, Larry?
I think that's it. That's our talk about toilets.
All right, perfect. From the email bag at questions@handymanprosradioshow.com, we received an email from Mark. And Mark has a plumbing question. He wants to know about connecting two different type of pipes. Larry, what would you recommend?
I would recommend that, number one, it's a little short on information, so we're going to make some assumptions. We're going to assume that we're talking about supply line pipes. So supply line pipes are pressurized pipes, water coming into the house or coming from the hot water heater going up to a faucet or shower or something. So that's going to be the first assumption that we make. And when he's describing two different types of pipes, so we're going to assume something like maybe he's got copper as an inlet side now, and he's doing a remodel, and he's going to go to a PEX type pipe or a CPVC pipe. I never can say that right, but he's going to go to some kind of, say, from a metal to a plastic pipe. So there's a lot of ways to do this kind of thing. The latest and greatest technology, as they say, or it's actually the easiest for a do-it-yourselfer, and even for us as professionals, the technology is really fantastic. It's called push to connect, and it's commonly known as shark bites. You slide it on one side, you literally push it on, it will connect. It requires a tool to actually get it off, and it does allow for different types of pipe to be used. John, have you ever used this product?
I have.
And
it's easy to use. It's quick. It's clean. And it really replaces, it answers that question for sure, but it replaces a lot of the mess, dude.
Right. No sweating of copper fittings on or anything like that. No glue joints to do. Right. The only thing that I've ever heard about problematic with shark bite types products is that they cannot be buried. So as long as you're not burying them underground, you generally shouldn't have any problems with the product itself. Very, very simple to do. Basically clean off the end of the pipe, push it on, push the other piece into it, and you're done.
Very, very, very easy. All right. Well, that answers that. Good luck, Mark.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed this podcast and have derived some value from it, here's 4 things you can do. 1, tell your friends about this podcast. 2, hit subscribe on your podcast player. While you're there, leave us a review. 3, subscribe to our newsletter by going to handymanprosradioshow.com and click on the subscribe button. We'll inform you of upcoming events, shows, and give you actionable tips for maintaining your home and property. And 4, send us an email with your questions to questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. That's handymanprosradioshow.com. That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the Handyman Pros Radio Show.